We've got some incredible lenses from Tamron to talk about today, but first, I know this video comes out the day before Halloween, but we're gonna keep things strictly informational, no creepy, spooky shenanigans or anything like that.
Oh, a creepy old book. Let's go read it.
Yeah. Guys, do you mind? I'm filming here. Reckless youths. We got our hands on two new Tamron lenses. First was the Z-mount version of the extremely popular 35-150, as well as an E-mount 17-50mm f4 full frame lens. Yes, you heard that right, 17-50 full frame. We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into some sample images, our experiences using them. But first, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more lens reviews and other non-spooky photo and video related content. Okay, so to test these lenses, I used them to cover our DigitalFest. DigitalFest is this big sort of trade show. We bring in some speakers and ambassadors from various brands, including, you're gonna see a lot of Dixie Dixon here from Nikon. She spoke about photography and fashion photography and had this cool shooting bay situation set up. So everything you're about to see is going to be shot on one of these two lenses. First up, we'll have the 35-150 f2-2.8 lens. This has been an extremely popular lens for Sony shooters. I've used it a number of times, largely in video on the FX6 or FX3. It's got Tamron's XVD linear autofocus mechanism, which is incredible. It's got customizable buttons. So the first thing I want to really talk about with this lens is why 35-150 is such a big deal. First, for me, when I was first getting into photography, I literally would ask people, like, does somebody make like a 35-125 or 35-150? So I feel like that would be my jam. That would be like my perfect lens. And it turns out Tamron heard me. But simply from a focal length perspective, we're gonna cut to a live, unbroken shot starting at 35mm and zooming all the way to 150. 35 is a great starting point for any lens. It makes for a good wide that still feels kind of natural. And of course, the more and more and more you zoom in, the more compression you get, the more flattening out of features and things of that nature. So as you can see, this is a huge range with a lot of possibilities. And you can see in these photos here, like we can go from a wide to a tight with without taking a step and still having lots of light to do it. It's a bit like taping a 24-70 and a 70-200 together and then just chopping off the ends. It's worth noting that though this is a variable aperture lens, my experience has been that in short distances, you kind of don't really notice the change. So even in video, if you need to do a short zoom while you're recording, you're still gonna have a pretty good look, and it's not something that's super hard to compensate for in post if you're using a good codec. But it is something to keep in mind. You can't zoom from one end to the other and not notice a little bit of an exposure difference. So just from a focal length and aperture standpoint, this has a lot of uses and a lot of versatility. But all that versatility wouldn't mean jack-o'-lantern if the final image wasn't any good. But luckily, the final image is great. On the Z9, that 45 megapixel sensor, there's no room for lens flaws to hide. And the quality that you get is on par with a first party lens. It brings the sharpness, it brings the color accuracy. This is all shot wide open. I never brought down the aperture. And the autofocus as well performed extremely well. It performed exactly as a good Nikon lens would. It was fast, it was responsive, it was snappy. Going through the photos, I don't think I missed a single one. I know in the past that used to be an issue with third-party lenses in general, is that focus was never quite spot on, or it was a little bit slower, but especially with these newer Tamron lenses, and I know from experience with this, autofocus straight out of the box was spot on, super responsive, and absolutely effortless to use. Now, I really could go on for a very long time about this lens because it is absolutely my favorite lens for all sorts of things. And normally at this point, I would say, all right, who is this lens for? And quite honestly, I feel like this lens is for everybody. Anyone who uses a focal length of 35 or tighter, you will find this to be an extremely useful lens. Like quite honestly, like this covers just about everything. I would even say on the Z9, it really felt great. If you've ever used one of these guys on like a Sony A7, like this thing is not light. It is extremely heavy. There's a lot of heavy glass in here, but putting it on the Z9, it really felt like it balanced out really, really well. So it was really very easy to, pick up and point and shoot. So if anything, this is almost better for some of those bigger mirrorless cameras that we have out now. The only people I say might not want this is if you use a lot of gimbal work with a very small mirrorless camera, because this is so heavy and there's no tripod collar, balancing it's going to be kind of an issue. What do you think? Is this your dream lens like it is mine? Or are you holding out for Tamron to make the 16-300 f2.8 lens? Whatever it is, comment below, let us know. But we have another lens to talk about. This one is the 17-50 f4 full frame E-mount lens. So for DigitalFest, mostly I used this on the FX3 and a gimbal. I did throw this on this A7CR, which we will have a review for coming shortly. Stay tuned. But again, with this sort of very interesting range, I want to show you what that looks like in practice. So this time we're actually going to start at the far end, so starting at a 50mm, which is a fairly normal looking focal length. But as you can see, the further and further we zoom out, it gets this massive field of view. Unlike the 35-150, this does have a constant aperture, so you can go through the entire zoom range and never have to worry about your exposure changing too much. In photos, it did well. I would say the sharpness maybe isn't quite as good as something like 35-150 with a 60 megapixel sensor. Like, it was starting to notice, like, it wasn't bad, it just was definitely a little bit on the softer side. So just bear that in mind. If you are throwing this on a very high resolution camera, you might notice that the sharpness isn't perfect. But things like chromatic aberration, all that kind of stuff, all looked great. I even love that at 17mm, like, distortion wasn't too bad. Like, it just looked like a good wide angle lens, which is very impressive for a lens in this sort of price point. Autofocus functioned exactly as you'd want it to. I really feel like, though, this shined super well on a gimbal. It's small, it's lightweight, so it's very easy to balance. Because it's kind of narrow, like something like this, putting this on a gimbal, you're gonna need a bit of a spacer or something like that in order for this to fit. You can put this guy on and it's pretty much gonna be, flush with the bottom of the camera. And that's just really convenient. And so the whole gimbal system was nice and lightweight, nice and easy to use. And those super wide angles work really, really well on a gimbal. So we can get these incredibly dynamic movements. And then if there's kind of a moment or something that seems a little more interesting, I can zoom in a little bit, have a nice and steady shot. I feel like, in my experience with using gimbals, anything much past 50 is weird and kind of hard to manage. So having it be 17-50 is perfect for me and my gimbal work. I see this being killer for anyone who loves travel and just wants a nice compact lens that's very, very versatile. It's going to be great for crop sensor people who want something that's going to be good quality, but then they don't have to get rid of it when they jump to full frame. They now have, instead of a standard zoom, they have an ultra wide zoom that kind of creeps into that standard range. Really awesome and a great multi-purpose lens for multiple different types of photography and multiple different kinds of cameras. So there you have it, two great lenses from Tamron. If you like what you saw here today, feel free to pre-order the 17-50 in the link below, or order the 35-150 at pictureline.com. Thank you for joining this very non-creepy, not spooky, purely informational lens review. Don't forget to take your camera out today. See you next time. All right, guys, I think that's gonna be a wrap. Oh!